The woman sat frozen at the small wooden table, her thoughts twisting in every direction as she replayed the moment. She walked into the bakery, her coins clutched tight in her hand, and now she waited for Daniel to return, wondering why the noise from the kitchen had sounded so sharp and sudden, leaving her with a creeping feeling that something inside that room was not as ordinary as she hoped it. She tried to calm herself by focusing on the warm smell of bread drifting through the air, yet the scent only reminded her of how long it had been since she last ate a full meal, and her stomach tightened painfully as she listened to the faint, muffled movements behind the kitchen door, each sound growing stranger and more deliberate, like someone rearranging things with an urgency that made her pulse race her. Eyes drifted to the counter where she had first stood, and she remembered how Daniel had looked at her, not with pity, but with a strange recognition, as though he saw behind her tired eyes and into the silent battles she carried, and she wondered how a man with such presence and quiet authority could shift from gentle concern to sudden tension so quickly, making her question what he had encountered in the kitchen and whether it had anything to do with her arrival moments earlier. She glanced around the bakery, noticing details she had ignored before, the way one of the ceiling lights flickered in a slow, uneven rhythm, the way the door leading outside creaked faintly, even when no one touched it, and the way the shadows under the counter seemed slightly darker than they should be, as if something was hidden there, waiting, and she felt an uneasy chill slide down her back as she wondered why these things felt wrong. Only now, and not when she first entered, a whisper of cold air drifted through the bakery, brushing against her ankles, and she looked toward the front door, expecting to see someone stepping inside, yet the door had not moved, and the street outside remained still and empty, leaving her to wonder where the cold draft had come from, and whether something unseen had passed by her chair only seconds ago. Making her grip the table edge a little tighter, as she held her breath, she leaned back slightly, trying to ignore the growing heaviness in the air, but the feeling only intensified, as if the bakery itself was holding its breath along with her. And she felt the hairs on her arms rise as she sensed a presence behind the kitchen door. Not Daniel, but something else. Something watching her through the narrow cracks between the wood panels, with an attentiveness that made her heart beat unevenly in her chest. As she waited for the door to move again, a soft clatter from the kitchen made her flinch, and she turned her head quickly, just in time to see the bottom edge of the door shift inward, as though someone or something had pressed against it from the other side, and for a moment she thought she saw a shadow slide across the space between the hinges, long and thin and unnaturally fluid. But she forced herself to blink, hoping her tired mind was simply imagining it, as she tried to steady her breath before the door moved again. She considered standing and leaving the bakery quietly, slipping out before Daniel returned, because something deep inside her whispered that she was not meant to be here at this moment, that the crash she heard earlier was not an accident, and that the sudden change in the room was more than just her nerves. But when she tried to rise, her body felt heavy and rooted, as though the chair itself wanted her to stay, keeping her in place for reasons she did not understand, yet could not ignore. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, blending with the faint hum of the lights overhead, until she could hardly distinguish one sound from the other. And she glanced once more at the kitchen door, noticing it now stood slightly more ajar than before, revealing a thin sliver of darkness that seemed deeper than the shadows around it, and she wondered if Daniel was even still inside, or if the footsteps she heard minutes ago belonged to someone else. Entirely, she clasped her hands together, trying to steady her breath, but as she stared at the narrow opening of the kitchen door, she felt a growing certainty that whatever was about to emerge from that darkness would not be the warm-hearted man who had told her to sit down and eat first, and the realization made her stomach twist as she waited helplessly for the door to move again, signaling what was coming next. Daniel stood beside the woman with the full plate of food before her, but his eyes were fixed on the torn bag resting at her feet, as though it held the answer to something he had been searching for, and the tension in his shoulders tightened with every small movement she made, while he waited for her to speak again, though he did not yet reveal what troubled him beneath the calm mask he wore, and she watched him closely, sensing that he was measuring every detail of the moment, searching for a sign. She had not yet understood. She explained in a low, trembling voice that the bag had been given to her by a stranger on the street, a man who approached her so silently that she barely noticed him until he pressed the bag into her hands and stepped away. Without a single word, and as she spoke, she saw a shift in Daniel's expression, as if the description unlocked a memory buried deep within him, and he leaned in closer, listening, with a sharpness that startled her, as if the identity of the silent stranger mattered more than she realized. Daniel knelt down beside the bag, lifting one corner carefully, as though afraid it might contain something dangerous, and when he looked inside, his face blanched for a moment as he stared at the contents hidden beneath a folded cloth, and the woman leaned forward, unable to stop herself from trying to catch a glimpse of what had struck him with such fear. But Daniel quickly covered the opening again, before she could see anything, leaving her to question what he had discovered inside the torn fabric. He rose to his feet slowly, as though the weight of the revelation made each movement heavier, and he asked her if she remembered anything else about the man who gave her the bag, even the slightest detail. His voice tight with urgency, and she struggled to recall the brief encounter, but all she remembered was the way the man seemed to appear out of nowhere, and the way his eyes had looked too intense for someone offering charity, making her uneasy now that she thought about it. Again Danielle walked toward the front door of the bakery, glancing outside as if expecting to see the mysterious man waiting somewhere beyond the glass, and when he saw only the empty street, he touched the edge of the door lightly with his fingertips, as though checking if it had been opened recently, and his expression darkened, as though the quiet street itself concealed something he could not yet name, while the woman stayed seated behind him, gripping the chair in fear, wondering what danger she had unknowingly carried into the bakery. Heat returned to her side with a careful, measured step, and told her that the bag was not what she believed it to be, that someone had placed something inside it that was never meant for her, and his tone held a gravity that made her breath hitch as she imagined what could be hidden beneath the cloth, and he urged her to tell him exactly where she encountered the silent stranger, insisting that time might be running out for reasons she could not yet understand. She described the alleyway near the old bookstore, the broken street lamp, the narrow path where the stranger approached her, and Daniel's face grew even more tense as he listened, because he knew that alley well, and the memories tied to it were ones he had tried to bury for years, and his pulse quickened with the realization that the stranger had not chosen the woman randomly, but rather had sought her out for a specific purpose, connected to something far bigger than a simple bag of groceries. Daniel hesitated before opening the bag once more, this time pulling aside the folded cloth just enough to confirm what he feared, and the woman watched him with wide eyes as he inhaled sharply, as though the sight inside confirmed a truth he had hoped never to face again. And though he quickly covered it once more, she could tell from the dread in his expression that the object within the bag was something dangerous, something tied to a past he had kept hidden from everyone, including himself. Cold silence fell over the bakery as Daniel slowly straightened and placed a hand on the table, stabilizing himself, and he looked at the woman with a seriousness that made her heart pound as he told her that the man who gave her the bag was not just a stranger, but someone who had been searching for Daniel for a long time, tracking him through the shadows of the city, and that her encounter earlier that morning was not accidental, but a warning sent by someone he hoped never to see again. She stared at him, stunned, as the weight of his words sank in, and she realized that her simple attempt to buy a slice of bread had drawn her into something far more dangerous than hunger or poverty. And Daniel moved closer, lowering his voice, as he explained that the stranger was not finished, and that whoever had placed the object in her bag was likely watching them at that very moment, waiting for Daniel to uncover the message that had been delivered to him through her, without her knowledge or consent. As the bakery lights flickered once more, in a sudden wavering glow, Daniel turned toward the window, his body stiffening as though he sensed a presence just beyond the glass, and the woman followed. His gaze with growing terror, wondering what or who might be standing outside in the quiet street, and waiting for the moment when Daniel finally opened the bag and revealed what the stranger truly intended to send into his life next.